You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. Several of you are asking about Blake Baker, and that is candidly an oversight on my part. I was told Blake Baker's name earlier today. I put out a tweet and totally forgot to include his name, and I did the segment on the DC candidates list and forgot to mention Blake Baker. I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. Yes, I have heard Blake Baker's name. Blake Baker, of course, was here at LSU as the linebackers coach. He got hired away by Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri to be the defensive coordinator there, and they had a pretty good season. There with Blake Baker as DC. One thing to keep in mind is that just a few weeks ago, like the week before Christmas, Blake Baker signed a contract extension at Missouri. So he was set to earn $1.1 million this past season, with annual increases of $100K through 2025, and he's getting bumped now. So that's clearly not a deal breaker. It's not to say that just because he signed I mean, what are contracts in college football today worth the paper they're printed on? Buyouts are more of the thing that are of interest and intrigue. But Blake Baker and the offensive coordinator there, Kirby Moore, both got contract extensions the week before Christmas, before they even won the Cotton Bowl. So yes, Blake Baker is another name that you need to add to the list. If you're just joining, I did share a list of names that I had been told earlier today, and again, just my total oversight for forgetting to put Blake Baker on the tweet. DJ Durkin from A&M, Tony Gibson from NC State, Lance Guidry from Miami, Bobby April III from Stanford, Bob Diaco, who's on staff at LSU. I think Bobby April and Bob Diaco, candidly, are very, very long shots. But sometimes the way lists like this get put together are, yes, there's names that get leaked by people internally that have names of interest. There are agents that want their candidate's name involved, and sometimes you might leak a name so that that name gets mentioned for jobs like this, which puts it front and center in the forefront of a lot of people's minds as someone who might be interested in a job as you're sort of fishing. A good agent does that. A good agent is always seeking a better and best opportunity for his or her client. So I don't think Bobby April III or Bob Diaco get this job. But sometimes names are mentioned for that reason. So my apologies. Yes, Blake Baker should have been mentioned in my segment a bit ago. My apologies. Gigantic news that, as you know by now, LSU fires 4 defensive staffers, including defensive coordinator Matt House, along with Robert Steeples, Kerry Cooks, and Jimmy Lindsey. So 4 defensive staffers out. And now the chore for Brian Kelly becomes rebuilding this staff. Let me start. I do have I have 5 defensive coordinator names I'll share with you. This is not my list, okay? This isn't my wish list. These are names that I was told today and making a lot of phone calls and kind of ear to ground, knocking on doors, making phone calls. These are names that I was told are part of the conversation, at least in the early going. I don't think this is a final list. I'm not saying definitively it's one of these guys. I'm saying these are the first names that were shared with me today. And in my experience, generally, if there's a name that seems obvious, there's a reason. I remember LSU went through this back in 2014 when they brought in Kevin Steele. And Kevin Steele was the first name a lot of people mentioned, and there was a reaction like, it's just an obvious one everyone mentions. Well, he got the job. It's because sometimes there's a reason someone is an obvious name. So I'll get you to some of those first. But I want to address 2 potential assistants that we've talked about a lot here, and just kind of update you. One is Corey Raymond. And I've been sort of direct. Can you be sort of direct? I don't know. We talked a lot about Corey here. And in no uncertain terms, I've told you Corey wants to come back. He's made it known he wants to come back. And there are people internally in this program, not just on staff, but in the LSU athletic department, that want Corey Raymond back. He and Billy Napier were never a fit. They did not get along together. They parted ways, and Corey Raymond still has not been hired anywhere. And at this point, I've told you this for a long time now, that this felt like a foregone conclusion, and I think this is going to get done. I think Corey Raymond will be back on the LSU staff. So Raymond, I think, is going to get done, and I think that probably gets announced pretty soon. One question is, do they hire one defensive backs coach or two? So Raymond, when he was here for a long time, was the DB's coach. And then later in his time, they split the duties with he and Bill Bush, and that didn't go over so hot. It feels like they're going to have split duties again, but it may be fine just to get him back in. The other name I was told was TJ Rushing. So TJ Rushing went to Stanford, played in the NFL, won a Super Bowl with the Colts back in 2006. He has coached all over. Arizona State, Northern Arizona, Memphis, and most recently, since 2020, has been the DB's coach at Texas A&M. So he's been on staff at A&M, and TJ Rushing is one of the names I was told today to keep an eye on, potentially to partner with Corey Raymond in the secondary. As for defensive line, the other name we've talked about a ton is Bo Davis. And Bo Davis played at LSU. He's got tons of experience. He's a Pete Jenkins disciple, tons of experience in the SEC. He's been at Bama. He's now currently at Texas. Texas just finished their season, as we all well know. And again, like Corey Raymond, there are a lot of people internally that are pushing to bring Bo Davis back to LSU. And this would be phenomenal. He's a great defensive line coach, and he is one of the best recruiters in the country. If you have a staff that has Frank Wilson, Bo Davis, Corey Raymond on it, you were talking about one of the most elite recruiting staffs in all of college football, bar none. The issue with Bo Davis is he this year at Texas made $1 million as the defensive line coach. You're not getting him here for $1 million. You're going to have to give him a raise. I would point out whenever you got Cortez Hankton from Georgia. Hankton was the passing game coordinator at Georgia. He was making $550. You paid him $850 to come to Baton Rouge. You made him the highest paid receivers coach in the country. Well, that's what it took to get him away from the national champion. So what's it going to take to get Bo Davis? He's making $1 million at Texas. It take $1.5 million? Yeah, Texas could match that, and they wouldn't lose him over money. But the opportunity to coach at his alma mater for $1.5 million, he'd take it. The question is LSU willing to pay its defensive line coach $1.5 million? And I don't know the answer to that. And that's something we're going to have to wait and see. Again, it feels like we've had the Bo Davis conversation every year for the last decade. If it happens, it would be awesome. But there are financial hurdles you will have to clear in order to make this happen to get Bo Davis here. We'll see if they're able to do it. Can you get him to take a hometown discount and take less to come coach at his alma mater? I have no idea. That's a question ultimately Bo Davis, his agent, whatever, going to have to answer. And however they make that work, pull on his heartstrings, the sentimental value of coaching at his alma mater, maybe have Pete Jenkins call him up and really push it. I don't know. But everyone would love to see this happen. There is a major hurdle financially with Bo Davis. I'll just leave it at that. As for the defensive coordinator candidates, I told you there were 5. So I'll run through them. No particular order. This isn't alphabetical or anything. I'll pass them along to you. First is DJ Durkin. DJ Durkin is currently spent the last 2 years as the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. And although A&M's teams haven't been great, their defense the last 2 years have been really good. Now, they had a lot of talent, of course, but they were good defensively. Durkin has got a ton of SEC experience. He was at Florida in the early 2010s under Will Muschamp. Jim Harbaugh hired him at Michigan back in 2015 when Harbaugh got the Michigan job. From there, he went to Maryland where he was the head coach. He left Maryland amid scandal. You might remember there was a player who died in off-season workouts. He was fired. Matt Canada took over as the interim. After that, he went to the Atlanta Falcons as a consultant, got back into college coaching as the co-defensive coordinator at Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin in 2020. So he spent 2 seasons at Ole Miss and then spent the last 2 seasons at Texas A&M. So you have a guy that is deeply rooted in the SEC, is only 45 years old, has been a defensive coordinator at high-level programs in the SEC and at the University of Michigan, and obviously knows Texas A&M, its personnel really well. And you got a couple of guys who you've already flipped from A&M and might be looking for a few more. So DJ Durkin is one that I think you have to mention on this list. Tony Gibson is a name that's probably not going to be very familiar to a lot of people, but he's the defensive coordinator at NC State. During his career, he's coached linebackers and safeties. He's also been a special teams coordinator. He probably would be most notable for his time with Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia. He was there with Rich Rod at West Virginia in that fateful 07 season whenever they lost to Pitt. Of course, it benefited LSU. When Rich Rod went to Michigan, Tony Gibson went with Rich Rod to Michigan, where he was the associate head coach and also coached special teams and defensive backs. From there, he went to Pitt, then to Arizona as the associate head coach, then back to West Virginia, where he was the defensive coordinator. And since 2019, he's been the defensive coordinator at NC State, known to be a very aggressive style. He's 51 years old. He is a defensive back by trade. At NC State, he's currently making north of $1 million. So we'll see what may happen there with Tony Gibson. That's another name worth keeping in mind. Lance Guidry is one that should be familiar to a lot of people in Louisiana. He's from Welsh, so he's from Southwest Louisiana. Shout out. He's 52 years old. He played at McNeese, started his coaching career as a GA at McNeese, and he's been around. He coached high school at Leesville, at Karen Crow, went back to McNeese, back to the high school ranks. He went to Miami of Ohio, became actually the interim head coach at Miami of Ohio. Defensive coordinator at Western Kentucky. Then he went to McNeese as the associate head coach there with Frank Wilson. He became the head coach in 2016 at McNeese. Went to Southeastern for a season. Went to Florida Atlantic for a season. The life of a coach. Went to Marshall for 2 seasons. Last offseason, you might remember Lance Guidry was hired from Marshall to be Tulane's defensive coordinator. Before he ever coached a game at Tulane, Mario Cristobal came and plucked him away, and he spent this year as the defensive coordinator at Miami. So 1 season this past year at Miami, and is a guy who, if you're able to get him home, ties to Frank Wilson, ties to Louisiana, Southwest Louisiana. He's coached high school here. He's well known. Again, another aggressive style of defense. 52 years old. Lance Guidry's a name worth keeping an eye on. And then I'll give you 2 long shots. Admittedly, these are both long shots, but names that were mentioned today for various reasons. Bobby April III. Of course, the son of Bobby April, who was the longtime Saints assistant. He went to St. Paul's in Covington. Shout out Haldane. Went to ULL. So he's got deep ties in Louisiana because of his dad. And has coached at ULL. He's coached at Tulane. He's coached at Nichols. Spent 6 years in the NFL. And after his 6 years in the NFL with the Eagles, Jets, and Bills, he was hired at Wisconsin. So he was on staff there as the linebackers coach under Jim Leonard. All those great Wisconsin defenses, that's his school. He was an assistant under Jim Leonard on those Paul Chryst teams at Wisconsin. When the Wisconsin staff got blown out, he got hired by Stanford to be their defensive coordinator. So this past year, Bobby April III was in his first season as a defensive coordinator at Stanford. I don't think you're going to make a guy who's been a DC for 1 year your defensive coordinator at LSU after you just blew out Matt House and paid him, nearly $4 million to go away. I don't know that you take this type of a risk. Admittedly, a long shot, but a name worth mentioning in this search. And lastly, there are 2 guys currently on staff that have been defensive coordinators. John Jancic, who we mentioned, who's been a defensive coordinator at a high level for a really long time. I don't know definitively if John Jancic is looking to be a defensive coordinator at this point. I just candidly do not know the answer to that. And that was not a name that I was told today. But John Jancic is a super respected coach. He's coached with Brian Kelly for a long time. But the other name is Bob Diaco, who Bob Diaco is on staff now. He was on staff as an analyst. And then when Jimmy Lindsey became sick, John Jancic moved to defensive line, and Bob Diaco went on field to coach outside linebackers, the jack linebacker spot, and special teams. Well, Bob Diaco was a defensive coordinator under Brian Kelly on that 2012 team that played Alabama for the national championship, the team with Manti Te'o and his fake dead girlfriend. So he's coached elite-level defense before as a young defensive coordinator. He parlayed that into the head coaching job at UConn. Now, it didn't work as a head coach for for Bob Diaco, but he had been at Cincinnati with Brian Kelly, then went to Notre Dame, got the UConn head coaching job. After that, he became the DC at Nebraska. He coached outside linebackers at Oklahoma, became the DC at Louisiana Tech, DC at Purdue, then went into the USFL and coached the New Jersey Generals before Brian Kelly brought him back into the college game at LSU. So that's a dude who's only 50, and I'll tell you, I know Bob Diaco wants the job. I don't know that he's going to get the job. But it's one worth mentioning as well. So that's the short list that I have as of now. DJ Durkin, Tony Gibson, Lance Guidry, Bobby April III, Bob Diaco. I'm not telling you definitively it's going to be one of those guys. I'm just saying here, as you push off from the dock and they start this conversation and Brian Kelly's pulling out his Rolodex and putting together a list, these are names that were mentioned to me today. So the search is on, and I believe, especially with some of the assistants, this is going to move quickly. And when I say quickly, I think some of this, we may start to hear leaks about some of these deals being finalized before the end of the week. So I hesitate to put a time frame on it because with all coaching searches, it's never done until it's done. Signed, and you got to coach at the podium. And as I say often, even sometimes then it's not really done. But we'll wait and see. So there's an early list for defensive coordinator candidates for LSU. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.